The story of Germans in Livonian cities like Riga and Tallinn during the medieval and early modern periods is one marked by dominance, tension, and periodic uprisings from the local Baltic populations. The arrival of German settlers in the region began in the 12th and 13th centuries, when the Livonian Crusades brought German knights, merchants, and clergy to the eastern shores of the Baltic Sea. Over time, these Germans became powerful figures in the region, particularly in the cities of Riga, Tallinn, then Reval, and other key towns where they established a dominant socio-economic and political presence. However, their role as colonizers often led to deep resentment among the indigenous Baltic populations. The Livonian Crusades, sanctioned by the Pope, were aimed at converting the pagan peoples of the Baltic region, such as the Estonians, Latvians, and Livonians, to Christianity. German knights from the Teutonic Order and the Livonian Brothers of the Sword, along with German merchants from the Hanseatic League, played key roles in these campaigns. Over the years, as the Germans established control over Livonia, they founded and fortified cities like Riga and Tallinn, turning them into thriving hubs of trade and administration. German settlers in Livonian cities were often seen as an occupying force by the local Baltic populations. They took control of land, resources, and political power, dominating the social hierarchy in the cities. The Germans formed the urban elite, with merchants and nobles running the city's economies and holding positions of authority in local councils. The Baltic populations, on the other hand, were largely marginalized, relegated to lower social classes, and often excluded from political participation. This division between the German elite and the native populations became a source of deep social resentment. One of the key factors that heightened tensions between the German settlers and the local Baltic populations was the control of trade and commerce. German merchants, primarily members of the Hanseatic League, controlled the lucrative trade routes that passed through Livonian cities like Riga and Tallinn. These cities became major centers of commerce, dealing in goods such as grain, timber, furs, and fish, with trading networks stretching across the Baltic and beyond. The German merchants' monopoly on trade left the local populations economically dependent and, in many cases, impoverished, leading to increased friction. Religious differences also fueled tensions. Although the Livonian Crusades had introduced Christianity to the region, the local populations had only recently been converted, and many still held onto their pagan beliefs and customs. German settlers, particularly the clergy, viewed the local population's religious practices with disdain, often seeing them as inferior or unworthy of full inclusion in the Christian society they sought to build. Over time, even as the local populations adopted Christianity, the Germans maintained a religious hierarchy, often placing the local clergy under the control of German bishops and religious leaders. This inequality and cultural dominance did not go unchallenged. Throughout the centuries, the local Baltic populations periodically rose up against their German overlords. These uprisings were often sparked by economic oppression, social discrimination, and political disenfranchisement. One of the most significant uprisings occurred in the early 14th century, when Estonian peasants and some townspeople in Tallinn rebelled against German landowners and merchants, seeking to overturn the social order. Although the rebellion was eventually crushed, it exposed the deep-seated animosity between the Germans and the indigenous peoples of Livonia. In Riga, similar tensions arose. The city's German elite often clashed with the native Latvians, who resented their exclusion from political and economic power. In the late 15th century, tensions reached a breaking point when a series of riots erupted in the city, with local inhabitants attacking German merchants and nobles. These riots were brutally suppressed, but they left a lasting legacy of division between the two groups. Despite these uprisings, the German settlers continued to dominate Livonian cities for centuries. The German presence in Riga, Tallinn, and other cities persisted through the Livonian Wars of the 16th century, when the region was contested by various powers, including Russia, Poland, Sweden, and Denmark. Even as political control of Livonia shifted between these empires, the German elite maintained their privileged position in the cities, continuing to wield influence over trade, governance, and society. However, the tensions between the Germans and the local Baltic populations never fully disappeared. The native populations, though Christianized and partially integrated into the new social order, continued to harbor resentment toward the German elite, viewing them as foreign colonizers who exploited their land and people. This tension simmered beneath the surface, occasionally erupting in violent uprisings and social unrest. The story of Germans in Livonian cities is one of colonization, power, and resistance. While the German settlers brought economic development and urban growth to cities like Riga and Tallinn, their dominance over the local populations created a legacy of social and ethnic division that would shape the region's history for centuries to come. The periodic uprisings of the local populations were a reminder that the balance of power in Livonia was always precarious, with the native peoples resisting the German hold on their cities and lands.